I found something weird again! So, Full Spectrum Warrior is a 2004 squad tactics game for the original Xbox, developed by Pandemic Studios and published by THQ. It's about commanding a pair of US Army fire teams through urban combat scenarios using realistic fire and maneuver tactics. The game doesn't give you direct control over your fire teams, instead you give them orders using a cursor in this over-the-shoulder sort of view. It gives it more dramatic flair than the usual top-down camera for these kinds of games, at the cost of some usability. It's pretty good, and it sold quite well, nothing too out of the ordinary, but a welcome addition to the console's lineup. But if you pick up one of the many copies of the game, you may notice an odd declaration on the back. Based on a training aid developed for the US Army. What? How did Pandemic, the studio that went on to make Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries, end up developing military training software? Well, it starts in 1999 with the founding of the Institute for Creative Technologies at the University of Southern California. Its goal was to leverage the area's talent pool for the simulation and training industry, which, of course, means it was funded by the US Army. The military took an interest in real-time rendering at around this time. While they'd been using simulation to train pilots and other vehicle operators for decades, those systems were extremely expensive, specialized, and... yeah. But now technology was reaching a point where such things could be employed more widely, and they were keen on exploring their options there. They also had some less sensible decision-making going into it. There was this one general, I forget his name, who'd just seen the movie Predator. The Predator had a shoulder-mounted camera that tracked movement along with its head, and when the general had seen it, he'd had an epiphany. The military never thinks of anything like this. Why not? Setting that aside, as far as price performance goes, it was hard to beat the value of commercial game consoles, especially with the 6th generation on the horizon. So in 2000, the Army and the ICT partnered with the experienced developers at Pandemic to see what could be done with the platforms. To make Full Spectrum Warrior happen, the Army gave the team a $5 million budget, military advisors, active duty sergeants, and several trips to the base at Fort Benning, Georgia. This was mainly an experimental project, but they were serious about it. The sim was initially planned for the PlayStation 2, with Sony as a collaborator, but that fell through when the team learned that foreign-made hardware wouldn't be allowed on military bases. So the Xbox was the obvious alternative. Still affordable, but a lot more powerful, and all-American, baby, woo! That wasn't the only thing that changed course during development. Given that the project started in 2000, the original setting was Eastern Europe, which didn't stick around for pretty obvious reasons. More importantly for us, it also got a commercial release. The developers at Pandemic were going above and beyond on presentation with the hopes of pitching it to a publisher down the road. The Army was more than happy to let them do so in return for, bearing a couple $1 million worth of work on the military version. The commercial branch was ultimately picked up by THQ and is what hit store shelves in 2004. So that was that. They made an Army version and a public version, delivered them to each, and everybody went on with their lives. But there was one more wrinkle. The Army only wanted a couple thousand copies of their training software, but Microsoft wasn't willing to print so few discs. And then the thought arises, well, THQ's printing a lot. Yes, I kid you not, they just stapled it to the retail version. You might be thinking, nah, you stupid yeast for brains, I played Full Spectrum Warrior and there was no Army mode. Ah, but you see, they hid it behind the most foolproof security measure known to man, a cheat code. It's this. I don't know why. It stayed secret for all of one day. Inputting the code in the cheats menu will launch the simulator, which is a completely separate program from the main game. If you're using a custom dashboard, you can actually boot straight into that executable and bypass the retail version entirely. The first thing you see when you start Army mode is this inviting message. Note, the following is created for and intended to be used solely as a training tool for the United States Army, and only for this purpose. The creators of this tool cannot be held accountable for any issues pertaining to functionality, performance, or compliance with standard conventions of usability found in video games. Any abnormalities encountered throughout the course of use are entirely a product of the user's own volition. Experience this tool at your own risk. I'm not entirely sure if that's called for, but sure. Anyway, welcome to Army mode. Things are different here. The first thing you'll notice is that the content is completely different from the main game. Instead of a campaign with purpose-built levels, Army mode has 6 missions across 2 maps. These maps are much less linear than the retail versions, with the first being multiple city blocks and the latter being a small suburb. That gives you a lot more tactical freedom. You can generally decide how you want to approach the mission instead of being funneled into a single route. The mission parameters are also customizable, but I genuinely couldn't tell if they were actually doing anything. The second obvious difference is that Army Mode is running on a different version of the engine from retail. I'm guessing it's an earlier one, partially because the simpler HUD matches early marketing material, but mainly because it just runs terribly. This older engine, combined with changes made to make the consumer game more palatable, has a major effect on gameplay. Army Mode uses a relatively realistic ballistic system. Units can be shot behind or through cover, as opposed to retail where it's all simplified to be more consistent and fair. You're also allowed to lose a few men instead of immediately failing when one dies, and the squad leader appears as a 9th infantry unit instead of being just a weird specter of tactical command like in the full game. The control bindings are all shuffled around too, so bouncing between this and retail can get a little confusing at times. Now's a good time to point out that Army Mode actually is available in the backwards compatible version of the game, albeit with the military branding stripped out. It plays exactly the same, but the resolution's higher, and I've been told it runs way better on Series X than on my old Xbox One VCR here. I am going to be playing on original hardware though, for authenticity! Yay! But the question remains, is this actually effective as training software? Let's go through all the missions and find out. Granted, this isn't exactly representative of how it would be used in the army. Normally a trainee would just run through a mission once and their instructor would use the replay system to review their performance with them. That's obviously untenable for me, but it wouldn't change my opinion anyway. Mission 1 is pretty straightforward. The squad starts on the west side of the urban map and has to reach the northeast corner. A hostile machine gunner covers the main road while other enemies patrol the area. This map is kind of the worst case scenario for Full Spectrum Warriors controls. Your commands are fairly approximate, and the dense geometry here leads to a lot of weird and fiddly interactions where your fire teams take cover in stupid ways or they don't respond to threats. It doesn't help that units in both versions of the game have basically no autonomy. They will do almost nothing without being told, so they will routinely stand there like gormless idiots while being shot at. It's also extremely cumbersome to navigate them through these dense streets. So, not an amazing first impression, but I can at least see how this could be used to demonstrate fire and maneuver tactics. The greater flexibility of approach is nice too, even if it clashes with the controls a bit because you can't easily react to anything. The second mission has the squad defending a street until a friendly convoy arrives. Sounds simple enough, but oh my god. This area has some really funky collision and few places to hunker down, and the OP4 love to materialize on every street and roof en masse. You're basically in a kill box the entire time. The only saving grace is that the spawns seem consistent, so after a few attempts you can get a sense for where the enemy's blind spots are and take cover in those. But I don't think anybody could reasonably be expected to do this in one attempt. Even if you had good enough tactical sense to recognize the best positions intuitively, the game simulator often won't let you use them. So unless the convoy truck is named the Kobayashi Maru, this whole scenario seems pretty badly designed for purpose. Mission 3 is nothing! Like actually, really nothing. It's election day in, what's it called? Scandia, and we have to guard the voting station while civilians file in and out. Sometimes enemy sympathizers will come by and yell at you in the worst vaguely Middle Eastern accent some pandemic employee could muster, so you have to chase them off. The briefing suggests that armed hostiles might appear, but they never do. It really is just 10 minutes of waiting around. I understand that this kind of guard duty is pretty common in the army, but I imagine that resolving disruptions would be the part you'd have to train for. And given that that's basically automated here, this mission doesn't really seem useful for anything. We're moving to the suburban map now, which is a marked improvement. This one feels considerably bigger than the city, and it's a lot less dense. That's good, the commands work a lot better here. Mostly. We'll get to that. Mission 4 is pretty simple. We just defend a food truck and then sweep the area for any remaining enemies. It's not so bad outside of the initial ambush happening immediately with no time to prepare for it. Once again, I don't think you could really expect anybody to do this on their first try regardless of tactical ability, but it's more manageable than Mission 2 once you know what's going to happen. The rest is just some good old-fashioned fire and maneuver. Mission 5 is to locate a weapons cache in one of 2 buildings while insurgents patrol the town. Conceptually, I think this is the best mission. There are a lot of ways to go about the objective, but the map doesn't funnel you into an obvious route like in Mission 1, and killing every enemy is not actually required. But this is also the first, and mercifully last, time we have to clear buildings. Which is awful! It feels like they were going for something like classic Rainbow Six, but it's incredibly slow and clunky, and I cannot fathom what the point was because there aren't even enemies inside the buildings! I could see this one having a bit of training value while making your way towards the objective, but the room clearing is so poorly implemented that it's worthless. The sixth and final mission is appropriately called Invasion. Enemy forces are pushing from the south of the map, and the squad has to survive for about 6 minutes. This is easier said than done. Enemies spawn rapidly and immediately, so as far as I'm concerned, the only viable strategy is to fall back to the buildings behind the start point and hold the line the best you can. Which is exciting, but, maybe not so realistic in practice. Your limited command doesn't do you any favors. It would obviously be beneficial to have guns trained on every angle of approach, but you can only effectively direct whole fire teams at a time, so you can't split the party much. I'm no expert, but it feels like there are obviously better tactics for this problem that the game simulation won't let you use. So, not to bury the lead too much, but this is bad, right? As training software, I mean. Your squad control is too vague to execute anything but the most basic tactics, and most of the missions are so shoddily constructed that experience in them cannot possibly be transferable to real combat. Army mode has essentially zero value as a military simulation, and the government spent $5 million on it. If any of you are computer science students, or possibly software engineers at Silicon Valley startups, then you kinda know what this is like. You've been told to make a simulation of a real thing, or maybe it's some other software utility, but you don't have the resources, know-how, or ambition to do it right. So you just kind of make something that looks good from far away if you squint. And then your professor or boss or angel investor gives it a thumbs up because it seems legit and they don't really know the difference, or maybe they don't care either. And lo and behold, the world has a new piece of technically extant software that will never, ever be used. This occurs approximately 80 times per semester in every university CS department. But I'm just some guy, my opinion doesn't really matter. What did the Army think of it? Well, it depends on who you ask, but from what I gather, the ones using it weren't terribly impressed either. To quote Lieutenant Colonel Jim Riley, Chief of Tactics at Fort Benning, "It's not accurate enough. It's a neat game, but I'm not seeing where I can train with it. It became very evident to us that we hadn't done a good job in the development effort. People got caught up in the hype. We were looking for a home run. We got a single. And it was a broken bat single." Yeah, that's not the most glowing praise. But we don't have to take his word for it. This is all publicly funded. We can just read the reports, which are mostly inconclusive, but generally not positive towards Full Spectrum Warrior. Here's the twist. Full Spectrum Warrior wasn't the only interactive simulation made during the military's push for them. While it was in development, Quicksilver Software was developing Full Spectrum Command, which was in many ways its opposite. Instead of pushing graphics on a game console, it prioritized scale and AI quality on PC, with up to 200 concurrent units over much larger maps. We only have a few minutes of footage of Full Spectrum Command, and certainly no playable version, but we do know that the Army was quite happy with it, favorably comparing it against Full Spectrum Warrior in multiple papers. It even got future iterations, which this thing did not. And even setting aside the actual quality of Army mode, it makes sense. If you're an Army trainer, you don't even really need a simulator for those kinds of small squad infantry operations. It's maybe a couple dozen people. You can just do real-life exercises. But organizing that for a command role, involving potentially hundreds of people, is obviously much more difficult and expensive, so training with a simulation makes a lot of sense. Especially if you want to let trainees learn from mistakes without wasting everybody's time in the process. But despite all of that, Pandemic and the higher-ups in the Army were satisfied with how Full Spectrum Warrior panned out. I agree with the Colonel. Full Spectrum Warrior got into the press, it won some awards, too many chefs got into the kitchen, and it ended up ballooning. It was never going to be completely accurate. But then that's not what we set out to do. It was purely a research project. It wasn't even meant to be seen by an actual squad leader. The fact it got released like it did to consumers and the military is testament to the Pandemic team. It's also worth bringing up that financing commercial games about the US military isn't exactly outside the Army's wheelhouse to begin with. America's Army was a whole franchise of tactical shooters that the government entirely funded and released for free. They're keen on using games for recruitment. Thinking about it that way, Full Spectrum Warrior was actually kind of a killer deal for them. Their experimental training sim got polished, released, and marketed to the public on somebody else's dime. No wonder they'd pat themselves on the back. It goes without saying that Full Spectrum Warrior saw vanishingly little use as a simulator, but the army did eventually get some use out of it. Or rather, its assets. They were recycled for a PTSD screening experience in virtual reality, and possibly some other projects. Pandemic made a modestly successful sequel to the commercial game in 2005, but the series ended there. Military simulations as a whole have only become a larger facet of training in the years since. One you may be familiar with is Virtual Battlespace, which is sort of a distant cousin of the Arma games. But as far as I'm aware, Full Spectrum Warrior remains the only time that the actual, real military version of a sim was ever released to the public verbatim. It's certainly the only time that it happened on a game console, and that's never gonna change. Now it stands as yet another oddity that could only have happened in that strange window of the early 2000s, when ambition was just barely ahead of reality. It's the end card! Questions, hooray! It's been a hot minute since the last video, so everybody who pledged on Patreon at any point since then is listed on the side this time. Crunchy Yummies. Thoughts? I prefer worm doodles. Nothing like the sweet, sweet taste of red. Are there any games or topics you really wish you could talk about, but don't think they'd make for a good video? Yeah, there are a few. I've thought about making a video about Nerf Arena Blast because it's basically an Unreal Tournament mod, and that's very strange, but I ultimately don't have much to say about it beyond that. At one point I was making a Shadow Generations video as a follow-up to that thing nobody watched, but that one got scrapped because the game's just kinda good in a straightforward way. Like, I do really like Shadow Gens, but, you know, Frontiers was a step in the right direction foiled by some obvious massive flaws, and Shadow Gens is largely the same thing minus those flaws, so it's good. It's pretty much that simple. I don't really know what I'd say about it.